The fluorescent lights of the bustling supermarket flickered slightly, casting a harsh glow over the crowded aisles. The store was a maze of activity, with shoppers weaving in and out of the narrow pathways, their carts clattering against the linoleum floor. It was peak hour, and the air was thick with the mingling scents of fresh produce, baked goods, and cleaning supplies. The soundscape was a symphony of beeping scanners, rustling plastic bags, and the occasional cry of a tired child. Somewhere in the distance, a store employee's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a special on ground beef. Lena, a single mother in her early 30s, navigated the chaos with practiced ease. Her dark curls were pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face bore the faint lines of someone who had learned to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wore a simple denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt and jeans, her outfit practical but neat. Her son, Micah, trailed behind her, his small hand gripping the edge of the shopping cart. At 7 years old, he was a bundle of energy, his sneakers squeaking against the floor as he tried to keep up. But the fatigue of a long day was beginning to show in the way his shoulders slumped and the way he occasionally rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. Lena's cart was filled with essentials: a gallon of milk, a loaf of whole grain bread, a pack of diapers for her niece, and a few small toys she had promised Micah as a reward for his good behavior at school. She had clipped coupons meticulously, her fingers working carefully to trim the edges and organize them into a small envelope she kept in her purse. Every penny counted, and Lena was determined to stretch her budget as far as it could go. She had learned the hard way that survival often meant being resourceful. As they approached the checkout line, Micah tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, can we get some cookies? I'm really hungry." Lena paused, glancing down at her son. His big brown eyes were wide with hope, and his lips were pressed together in that way he did when he was trying to be polite but couldn't quite hide his longing. She knelt down slightly, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Not today, baby," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "But we'll have a nice dinner when we get home. Okay, I'll make your favorite, mac and cheese." Micah nodded, though his disappointment was evident in the way his shoulders drooped. "Okay," he mumbled, kicking at the floor with the toe of his sneaker. Lena felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. She had to stay focused. The line at the checkout was already long, and she could see the impatient glances of other shoppers as they shifted from foot to foot, their carts overflowing with groceries. She glanced at her watch, mentally calculating how much time they had before the bus arrived. If they missed it, they'd have to wait another half hour, and Micah was already exhausted. As they inched forward in line, Lena's mind wandered to the list of things she still needed to do before the day was over. Help Micah with his homework, prep lunches for tomorrow, and maybe, if she was lucky, squeeze in a few minutes to herself. She sighed, running a hand over her face. Life as a single mother was a constant juggling act, and some days it felt like she was one misstep away from dropping everything. Micah, sensing her tension, reached up and took her hand. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his voice small but earnest. "I don't need cookies." Lena's heart ached at his words. He was too young to understand the weight of their circumstances, but he had already learned to be resilient in ways that broke her heart. She squeezed his hand, forcing a smile. "You're my brave little man. You know that?" He grinned up at her, his earlier disappointment momentarily forgotten. "I'm not little," he protested, puffing out his chest in a way that made her laugh despite herself. The line moved forward, and Lena steered their cart into place behind an elderly woman who was carefully unloading her items onto the conveyor belt. She glanced at the cashier, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and a pinched expression, and felt a flicker of unease. Something about the woman's demeanor set her on edge, but she pushed the feeling aside. She just needed to get through this, pay for her groceries, and get home. The line inched forward at a glacial pace, and Lena used the time to double-check her coupons. She had spent hours clipping them from newspapers and printing them online, determined to stretch her budget as far as it could go. Every dollar saved was a dollar she could put toward Micah's school supplies or a rainy day fund. She glanced down at her son, who was now fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. His stomach growled audibly. and he looked up at her with pleading eyes. "Mom, can I have a snack?" Micah whispered, his voice tinged with both hunger and the fear of being scolded. Lena sighed softly, her heart aching for him. "Not yet, baby. We're almost done." "Okay, just a little longer." Micah nodded, though his shoulders slumped in disappointment. Lena made a mental note to pack a small snack for him next time, no matter how tight things were. She couldn't bear to see him hungry. Finally, it was their turn. Lena stepped up to the register, her cart filled with essentials: milk, bread, a small pack of chicken, and a few treats she had reluctantly added for Micah. She greeted the cashier with a polite smile, though the woman behind the register, Carol, according to her slightly crooked name tag, barely glanced at her. Carol's expression was one of thinly veiled annoyance, as though she had already decided Lena was going to be a problem. "Good afternoon," Lena said, her voice warm but firm. She began placing her items on the conveyor belt, careful not to let anything roll too far. "I have a few coupons here." Carol's eyes flicked to the stack of coupons in Lena's hand, and her lips curled into a faint sneer. "Coupons? Huh," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Guess some people will do anything to save a buck?" Lena's smile faltered, but she kept her tone even. She was used to comments like this, though they never failed to sting. "Just trying to make ends meet," she replied, her voice steady. "I hope it's not a problem." Carol snorted, her fingers moving over the scanner with deliberate slowness. She paused when she reached the coupons, plucking one from the stack and holding it up to the light like a detective examining a piece of evidence. "This one's expired," she announced, her voice loud enough for the people in the next line to hear. "Can't take it." Lena frowned, her heart sinking. She had checked the expiration dates meticulously before leaving the house. "That's impossible," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I checked them all before I came." Carol shrugged, her expression one of exaggerated indifference. "Well, it's expired now," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She tossed the coupon onto the counter as though it were trash. "Maybe you should learn to read the fine print." Lena felt a flush of anger rise to her cheeks, but she bit her tongue. She wouldn't give Carol the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Instead, she reached for the coupon and examined it herself. The expiration date was clearly visible. It wasn't due to expire for another week. "This coupon isn't expired," Lena said, holding it up so Carol could see. "The date is right here." Carol rolled her eyes, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Look, lady, I don't have time for this. If you can't afford your groceries without coupons, maybe you should shop somewhere else." The words hit Lena like a slap. She felt the eyes of other customers on her, their gazes heavy with judgment or pity. Micah, sensing the tension, tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Lena forced a smile for his sake, though her chest tightened with a mix of anger and humiliation. "It's okay, baby," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Just a little mix-up." But Carol wasn't done. She leaned over the counter, her voice rising so that everyone in the vicinity could hear. "You know, if you can't afford to shop here, maybe you should try a food bank or something. We're not a charity." Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she refused to let Carol see how much the comment hurt. She took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm using coupons, just like anyone else. And I'd appreciate it if you treated me with the same respect you show your other customers." Carol's lips twisted into a smirk. "Respect is earned, honey, and from where I'm standing, you're just wasting my time." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. Lena felt the weight of the other customers' stares, their silence deafening. She knew she could walk away, but something inside her refused to back down. She wouldn't let Carol's cruelty go unchallenged, not in front of her son, and not in front of everyone else who was watching. "I'm not wasting your time," Lena said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm a paying customer, and I deserve to be treated with dignity. If you have a problem with that, I'd be happy to speak to your manager." Carol's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. her tone dripping with mockery. Oh, by all means, call the manager. I'm sure they'll love to hear how you're holding up the line over a few expired coupons. Lena's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. Excuse me, said a woman from the line behind her. She stepped forward, her expression one of quiet determination. I couldn't help but overhear. That coupon isn't expired. I can see the date from here. And even if it were, there's no need to be so rude. Carol's eyes narrowed as she turned to face the newcomer. This doesn't concern you, she snapped. It does when I see someone being treated unfairly. The woman shot back. She turned to Lena, her expression softening. Don't let her get to you. You're doing nothing wrong. Lena felt a surge of gratitude, though the encounter had already left her emotionally drained. She nodded at the woman, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. The woman smiled gently. We've all been there. Just keep your head high. As the tension in the air began to dissipate, Lena couldn't help but wonder how many others had faced similar treatment. How many had been made to feel small and insignificant simply for trying to make ends meet. She glanced down at Micah, who was still clutching her hand, his wide eyes filled with confusion and concern. It's okay, baby, she said softly, squeezing his hand. Sometimes people aren't very nice, but that doesn't mean we have to be like them. Micah nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. Lena made a silent promise to herself. She would teach him to stand up for what was right, no matter how hard it was. And she would do the same, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. The line moved forward again, and Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. She wouldn't let Carol, or anyone else, diminish her worth. Not today. Not ever. Micah, sensing the tension, tugged at Lena's hand. His small fingers gripped hers tightly, his wide eyes filled with confusion and a hint of fear. Mom, what's wrong? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena squeezed his hand reassuringly, forcing a smile despite the knot of anger and humiliation tightening in her chest. It's okay, baby, she said softly, her voice steady. Just a little mix-up. We'll be done soon. Okay. But Carol wasn't done. She raised her voice, ensuring the other customers could hear. You know, if you can't afford to shop here, maybe you should try somewhere else. We're not a charity. The words hung in the air like a slap, sharp and stinging. Lena's cheeks burned, but she refused to back down. She straightened her shoulders, her voice firm despite the tremor of emotion beneath the surface. I'm not asking for charity, she said, her tone calm but resolute. I'm using coupons, just like anyone else. There's nothing wrong with that. A few customers turned to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Lena felt their eyes on her, judging, scrutinizing. She could almost hear their unspoken questions. Why is she making a scene? Why doesn't she just leave? The weight of their stares made her want to shrink, to disappear. But she held her ground. She wouldn't let Carol, or anyone else, make her feel small. Micah, still clutching her hand, looked up at her with a mixture of confusion and concern. Mom, why is she being mean to you? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Lena knelt down to his level, her heart breaking at the worry in his eyes. Sometimes, people aren't very nice, she said gently, brushing a curl from his forehead. But that doesn't mean we have to be like them. Okay, we just have to stay strong and remember who we are. Micah nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. Lena stood up, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let Carol's cruelty define this moment, not for her, and certainly not for her son. Just as the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control, a woman stepped forward from the line behind Lena. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name was Sarah, and she had been quietly observing the exchange, her patience wearing thin with every word Carol spoke. Excuse me, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm as she addressed Carol. But I use coupons all the time, and I've never been treated like this. What's the problem? Carol bristled, her face flushing with irritation. This doesn't concern you, she snapped, her tone dismissive. Sarah didn't flinch. It does when I see someone being treated unfairly, she shot back, her voice rising slightly. She turned to Lena, her expression softening. Don't let her get to you. You're doing nothing wrong. Lena felt a surge of gratitude, her eyes briefly welling with tears before she blinked them away. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. Sarah gave her a reassuring smile before turning her attention back to Carol. You should be ashamed of yourself, she said, her tone sharp but controlled. Treating a customer like this, especially in front of her child, is completely unacceptable. Carol's face reddened, but she didn't back down. I'm just doing my job, she muttered, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Your job is to treat people with respect. Sarah countered, not to humiliate them for trying to save a few dollars. The other customers in line began to murmur among themselves, some nodding in agreement with Sarah. A man in a baseball cap stepped forward, his arms crossed over his chest. She's right, he said, his voice gruff but firm. There's no call for this kind of behavior. Another woman, older and with a kind face, chimed in. I've been coming to this store for years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's disgraceful. The growing chorus of support emboldened Lena, but it also made Carol visibly uncomfortable. She glanced around, her bravado faltering under the weight of the collective disapproval. I don't have to stand here and listen to this, she said, though her voice wavered. No, you don't, Sarah replied. But you do have to treat people with decency. Maybe it's time you remembered that. The tension in the air was palpable, but Lena felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since the encounter began, she didn't feel alone. She looked at Sarah, at the man in the baseball cap, at the older woman who had spoken up, and she felt a sense of solidarity that warmed her from the inside out. Micah, still holding her hand, looked up at her with wide eyes. Mom, are those people helping us? He asked, his voice filled with awe. Lena smiled down at him, her heart swelling with pride. Yes, baby, she said softly. Sometimes, when people see something wrong, they step up to make it right. That's what good people do. Micah nodded, his expression thoughtful. Lena knew this moment would stay with him, shaping the way he saw the world. She just hoped it would teach him that kindness and courage could triumph over cruelty, even in the most unexpected places. As the murmurs of support continued to ripple through the crowd, Lena took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Micah, for Sarah, for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. And she wasn't going to back down. The commotion at the checkout line had grown loud enough to draw the attention of other shoppers, their curious glances turning into concerned murmurs. It wasn't long before the store manager, a young man named Daniel, appeared from the direction of the customer service desk. He was in his late 20s, with a crisp button-down shirt and a name tag that read manager in bold letters. His expression was a mix of concern and professionalism as he hurried over, his eyes scanning the scene. What's going on here? Daniel asked, his voice calm but authoritative. He looked between Carol, Lena, and Sarah, his brow furrowed as he tried to piece together the situation. Lena spoke up before Carol could defend herself. Her voice was steady, though the emotion behind it was unmistakable. I was trying to use these coupons, she said, holding up the stack in her hand. But your cashier here accused me of not being able to afford my groceries. She's been rude and dismissive from the moment I stepped up to the register. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he turned to Carol. Is this true? He asked, his tone firm but measured. Carol hesitated, her earlier bravado faltering under Daniel's scrutiny. She crossed her arms defensively, her voice losing its sharp edge. I was just doing my job, she muttered, though her tone lacked conviction. She was holding up the line with all these coupons, and some of them were expired. I was just trying to keep things moving. Daniel sighed, clearly disappointed. He had dealt with Carol's attitude before, but this was crossing a line. Your job, he said, his voice low but firm, is to treat every customer with respect, regardless of how they choose to pay. Coupons are a valid form of payment, and it's not your place to judge how someone shops. Carol opened her mouth to argue, but Daniel held up a hand, silencing her. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. He turned back to Lena, his expression softening. "I'm very sorry for the way you've been treated. That's not the kind of experience we want our customers to have. Let me take care of this for you." Lena nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "I just wanted to buy my groceries and go home. I didn't expect all of this." Daniel gave her a sympathetic smile. "You shouldn't have had to. Please, let me make this right." He stepped behind the register, gently nudging Carol aside. "I'll take over here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Carol hesitated for a moment, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. But she eventually stepped back, muttering something under her breath as she retreated to the end of the counter. Daniel quickly began scanning Lena's items, his movements efficient but careful. He picked up the coupons she had set aside, examining them briefly before nodding. "All of these are valid," he said, his tone reassuring. "I'll make sure they're applied to your total." Lena felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time. "I appreciate it." Daniel nodded, his expression sincere. "It's the least I can do. And again, I'm truly sorry for what happened. This isn't the standard we strive for at this store." As Daniel finished scanning the items and processing the coupons, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The other customers, who had been watching the exchange with bated breath, slowly returned to their own tasks, though a few lingered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and approval. Sarah, who had stood by Lena's side throughout the ordeal, gave her a reassuring smile. "You handled that really well," she said, her voice warm. "Not everyone would have kept their cool like that." Lena returned the smile, though her eyes still held a hint of weariness. "I just wanted to get through it without making a scene," she admitted. "But I'm glad you stepped in. It meant a lot." Sarah nodded. "Sometimes, people need a little push to do the right thing. I'm just glad I was here to help." As Daniel handed Lena her receipt, he offered one final apology. "Thank you for your patience," he said, "and please don't hesitate to let me know if there's anything else I can do to make this right." Lena accepted the receipt, her gratitude evident. "You've already done more than enough," she said. "Thank you." With that, she turned to Micah, who had been quietly observing the exchange. "Ready to go, baby?" she asked, her voice gentle. Micah nodded, his small hand slipping into hers. "Yeah, Mom, can we get cookies now?" Lena chuckled softly, the sound a welcome relief after the tension of the past few minutes. "Not today, sweetie, but we'll have a nice dinner when we get home." "Okay." As they walked away from the register, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The encounter had been painful, but it had also shown her that there were still people willing to stand up for what was right. She glanced down at Micah, his innocent face filled with trust and love, and she knew she had done the right thing by standing her ground. Daniel watched them go, his expression thoughtful. He knew this incident wasn't over, not for Lena, and certainly not for Carol, but for now. He was grateful that he had been able to diffuse the situation and offer some measure of justice. He made a mental note to address Carol's behavior more formally later. But for the moment, he focused on the task at hand, ensuring that every customer who walked through the doors of his store felt valued and respected. Back in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. Lena loaded the groceries into the trunk of her car, her movements slow and deliberate as she tried to process the events of the last hour. Micah climbed into his booster seat, buckling himself in with the kind of quiet focus that told Lena he was deep in thought. He was usually chatty after their trips to the store, full of questions about what they'd bought or what they were having for dinner. But today, he was unusually quiet, his brow furrowed as he stared out the window. Lena slid into the driver's seat and glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You okay, baby?" she asked, her voice gentle. Micah didn't answer right away. He fiddled with the strap of his seatbelt, his small face scrunched up in concentration. Finally, he looked up, his big brown eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but serious. "Why was that lady so mean to you?" Lena's heart ached at the question. She had hoped to shield him from the ugliness of the world a little longer. But she knew she couldn't avoid the truth. She turned in her seat to face him, her expression thoughtful as she considered her words carefully. Sometimes, people act mean because they're unhappy, she began, her voice calm and measured. Maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe they don't understand other people very well. But that doesn't make it okay. What she did was wrong. And I want you to know that it's never okay to treat someone that way. Micah nodded slowly, though his brow remained furrowed. But why didn't she like you? He asked, his voice tinged with confusion. You're nice. Lena smiled faintly, touched by his innocence. It's not about whether she liked me or not. Baby, sometimes, people judge others without really knowing them. They might make assumptions based on how someone looks or what they have or don't have. But that doesn't mean those assumptions are true. Micah was quiet for a moment, processing her words. I don't like when people are mean, he said finally, his voice small but firm. Me neither. Baby, Lena replied, her heart swelling with love for him. She reached back to brush a curl from his forehead, her touch gentle. But we can't let it change who we are. No matter how someone treats us, we have to remember to be kind and respectful. That's what makes us strong. Micah nodded again, though his expression was still troubled. What if she's mean to someone else? He asked, his voice tinged with worry. Lena sighed softly, her heart aching at the thought. If we see someone being treated unfairly, we can stand up for them, just like that nice lady did for us today. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to speak up and make a difference. Micah seemed to ponder this, his little face scrunched up in thought. I want to be like that lady, he said finally, his voice filled with determination. I want to help people. Lena's eyes welled with tears, though she quickly blinked them away. You already do. Baby, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You make me proud every single day. Micah smiled at that, his earlier worry easing slightly. Lena turned back to the steering wheel, taking a deep breath as she started the car. The encounter at the store had been painful, but it had also given her an opportunity to teach Micah an important lesson about kindness, resilience, and standing up for what's right. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the sun dipping lower in the sky, Lena glanced at Micah in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window again, his expression thoughtful but calm. She knew the world wasn't always fair, and she couldn't protect him from every hurt or disappointment, but she could teach him how to navigate it with grace and strength. Hey, Micah, she said after a moment, her voice light. How about we stop for ice cream on the way home? Just you and me. Micah's face lit up, his earlier worries forgotten. Really? He asked, his voice filled with excitement. Really? Lena said, smiling. You deserve a treat after being such a good helper today. As they drove toward the ice cream shop, Lena felt a sense of peace settle over her. The world might be complicated, but moments like this, simple, joyful, and full of love, made it all worth it. And as long as she had Micah by her side, she knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. Meanwhile, back at the supermarket, Daniel was having a tough conversation with Carol. He explained the importance of treating all customers equally, regardless of their background or how they chose to pay. Carol, though initially defensive, began to see the error of her ways. I didn't mean to be hurtful, she admitted. I guess I don't know. I wasn't thinking. Daniel nodded. It's not too late to make a change. Start with an apology, and then work on being more mindful in the future. The next day, Carol sought out Lena. She found her in the produce section, comparing prices on apples. Lena, right? Carol said. Her voice tentative. Lena turned, surprised to see her. Yes? Carol took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you yesterday. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. Lena studied her for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. I appreciate that. Carol hesitated, then added, I hope you'll give us another chance. We're not all like that. Lena smiled faintly. I'll think about it. Over the next few weeks, Lena noticed a change in Carol. The cashier was more polite, more attentive. She even started greeting Lena by name when she came into the store. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Lena began to wonder if people could truly change, if understanding and empathy could bridge the gaps between them. She decided to give Carol the benefit of the doubt, to see where this new dynamic might lead. One Saturday afternoon, the supermarket hosted a community event, offering free samples and discounts to local residents. Lena and Micah attended, and to her surprise, she saw Carol helping to organize the activities. Carol spotted them and waved. "Lena, Micah, come try some of the cookies we're giving out." Micah's eyes lit up, and Lena couldn't help but smile. As they approached, Carol handed Micah a cookie with a genuine smile. "Thank you," Micah said, beaming. "You're welcome," Carol replied. She glanced at Lena. "I'm glad you came." Lena nodded. "Me too." As the event continued, Lena found herself talking to Carol more than she ever had before. They discussed their families, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. Lena realized that Carol wasn't so different from her after all. They were both just trying to do their best in a complicated world. By the end of the day, Lena felt a sense of closure. The hurt from that initial encounter hadn't completely disappeared, but it had been replaced by something more hopeful. On the drive home, Micah chattered excitedly about the event. "Mom, that was so fun. Can we go again next time?" Lena smiled. "Of course, baby. I'm glad you had a good time." As she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw Micah's reflection, his face alight with joy. In that moment, Lena knew she was doing something right. She was teaching him resilience, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what was fair. The story of Lena and Carol spread through the community, becoming a symbol of growth and understanding. People began to talk more openly about the issues of discrimination and the importance of empathy. Lena, for her part, continued to shop at the supermarket, her head held high. She knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew that change was possible, one small step at a time. As the screen faded to black, a message appeared: "Respect knows no color, no background, no circumstance. Discrimination, in any form, is unacceptable. Let's choose kindness, always."